If you grew up with those great shooters on the Super Nintendo and you were looking to buy your next console, chances are you weren't looking at a Nintendo 64. I am the Game Collector and this is Second Opinion Games, and today we look at some of the shmups of the PlayStation 1.
Second Opinion Games.
We'll start things off with the mother of shooters, Gradius. Now, this was a Japanese import, so it probably has some type of subtitle that I'm not quite sure of. If you're not sure what type of game this is, well, chances are you've played a clone of it, because it's one of the most copied video games of all times. You pilot a ship around, collecting orbs that act as options, you'll have missiles that fall to the ground, and you'll have spread shots or lasers or something. The graphics here look fairly passable, because this was a very early shooter, certainly not pushing the PlayStation 1 to its absolute limits, but definitely fun to play, until you die, and then you go back to square one with all of your ship weapon stuff powered completely down. This becomes really frustrating, which means you play for about one life, and as soon as you die, you'll take out the disc and seldom play it again unless you happen to look up some cheat codes to get all of your power-ups back up to snuff. Also in my import sleeve, I got Salamander Deluxe Pack Plus. This is a total of 3 games: Salamander, Life Force, and Salamander 2. The first Salamander game looks kind of on the bad side. After all, this was a very early arcade experience. However, it does have the really cool voice synthesis. Also, when you start up this game from the very beginning though, you have an epic cartoon intro before you even start playing. I mean, that's before you even see the main title screen with all of the games on it. This is really fun to watch. Life Force is a lot like Salamander. Let me do a little screen wipe and show you. Yeah, down to the music, it's pretty much the same, but it just has a little bit more going on. It's also hard as nails. If you do happen to clear a level, well, then it switches from a vertical shooter to a horizontal or vice versa, and then you keep on playing, blowing stuff up. But what really steals the show here is Salamander 2. The graphics have been turned way up. Powering up your ship is easier than ever, and sometimes when you die, your ship gets a little force field around it, which can do immense amounts of damage to bosses. And speaking of bosses, there's even a few tricks up this game's sleeve that completely shock the crap out of you. And yeah, you feel really powered up when you are powered up, and it's extremely satisfying to play through. I just wish all of the other games were like this on this disc. Over to one of the more American arcade ports, we have R-Types. Now this is R-Type and R-Type 2 on here. R-Type 1 is very old school, just like the previous games, and that means it's a quarter muncher. It is extra freaking difficult, and you're not going to stand a chance. You have a charge shot and you have an option, but more on that later. We'll switch over to R-Type 2 for that, where the graphics have been turned way up, and yes, it's still a quarter muncher, but this time at least it lets you get through the first level before it starts getting painfully difficult. You still have your charge shot, which lets you just unleash some massive amounts of damage on your opponents, but what you really have to do is manage that option. So you could spit it out there and let it do some of the work for you, or maybe you could attach it to your front or your backside, and yeah, it's just a really fun game to play and offers quite a bit of strategy, even if it is also punishingly difficult. But people bought a new PlayStation to play their new games, not just old arcade ports. Check out R-Type Delta. This takes the tried and true R-Type experience of having a charge shot and an option that flies around when you want it to, and adds polygons just everywhere instead of using sprites. However, unlike most games of the time, the polygons here look freaking terrific. The boss battles are also extremely inventive. You never really get too lost in a mess of bullets. However, that doesn't mean the challenge isn't also there. Even though you do feel really overpowered, most of the time, your enemies and their strategies will be used to manipulate you in such such a way where you have to learn the environment to know when to let your option shoot off and when to use it as your shield and whatnot. This is a really creative game, and I strongly recommend everyone plays it. But I got a little bit ahead of myself. I left out Raiden Project. Now, this was a port of the arcade game Raiden. Not Raiden, that's the god of thunder for Mortal Kombat. No, in this, you're a ship that has to blow stuff up. You have a spread shot or you have a laser. You could also pick up homing missiles or just missiles that launch straight forward. Now, one of the things that are known in this game is the fact that your ship moves ridiculously slow. You also have a bomb that can eat some of the bullets away on the screen, but most of the time that's not gonna be good enough because the bullets come at you really stinking fast and your ship is too slow to take them on. But lucky for me, this was a 2-game disc, because it has Raiden 2 on here. It's pretty much the same game as 1, only your ship moves a little bit faster. Not a lot faster, just enough to make it a lot more playable. Also, it adds some more weapons, like different kinds of bombs, and a purple shot, which acts sort of like a spread, but not really, and a little like a laser, but not really. It's a great in-between weapon. Later on in the series, they dumbed this down to do a lot less damage, but here it does a lot of damage and blows stuff up really good. So it's very satisfying, and I really kind of like the color purple. Working Designs also got in the mix with Ray Crisis. This is another 3D polygonal blow everything up type of game. You have a lock-on feature, sort of like Panzer Dragoon, if Panzer Dragoon didn't steal this from this series or from another series that's very similar to this. It was pretty common at the time. Locking on to enemies afar, it then will unleash some missiles and having them blow up. But be careful because you don't want to have your missile locked on something too long because it could fly off the screen and then you don't get the bonus points for destroying it. And points are somewhat important if you want a high score. If you just want to survive, then unleash the missiles as fast as you can. You also have more than one type of ship here. I really like the laser ship because it does a lot of damage straight forward and you can still lock on targets, more targets than ever actually, and then blow everything up. This is a fantastic game, but maybe there's just a little too much going on here for me. Raystorm, also by Working Designs, is in the same series, but everything feels a little bit cleaner here. It's not as hectic with bullets just flying everywhere at you, probably because you can fully customize the levels at the very beginning of the game, so you can set up later levels to play a little bit easier, or earlier levels to play a little harder. You can completely customize it to fit you. You also have the 3 ships here. I like using the lasers with the lightning bolt attack, again with some sweet purple firing action. And yeah, this is really satisfying. The music is just so tranquil and hypnotic, it kind of really sucks you in and doesn't make you feel like you're getting ready for a panic anxiety attack at any second. If you had to pick one or the other, I recommend you go with Raystorm. Square also decided to throw their hat in the ring with Einhander or something like that. This is what they did with all that Final Fantasy VII money. They just kept on producing games with the highest possible quality, hoping people would absolutely love their company. And it kind of worked. People loved this game way back in the day. It was a side-scrolling shooter for most of the time. Then the camera would shift very subtly. Sometimes when you're in a firefight it would do it, but it doesn't make it too jarring. The boss battles here are huge and insane, but what really steals the show is the use of your sub-weapon. You could have it on top of your ship or below your ship, depending on how you want to use the weapon and where you want to fire for your aim. Sometimes they could actually feel quite a bit different whether or not you have it on top or below, or maybe even pointing backwards. Yeah, this game is a ton of fun, and good luck finding it now because it gets pretty darn expensive. However, it's worth every penny if you happen to be a collector or someone that really loves the shmups. On the cheaper side of things, you can look up Mobile Light Force. If this game looks a little familiar to you, it was also called Gunbird on the Saturn. Now there is a Mobile Light Force 2, but don't think it's Gunbird 2 from the Dreamcast. No, instead it's Castle Ashimagami 1. So it's the first game in either series. Also, there's a storyline here, but they didn't translate it whatsoever because it gets a little child unfriendly, or maybe a little child too friendly, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of a creepy game. Luckily, it's all in Japanese, so we have no idea what's going on. You have quite a few different things to choose from, and yeah, it's just a shooter with somewhat subpar graphics at the time. I'm not saying the game's not fun. It's actually really quite fun. It just probably plays a little bit better on the Sega Saturn and is somewhat interesting on the PlayStation. Even more interesting was In the Hunt. Now, this also appeared on the Sega Saturn, but it suffered from crippling slowdown on that system. This also has some exclusive PlayStation content with PlayStation sound effects, which I kind of don't recommend, but for the sake of this review, they're on here. I kind of like the arcade sound effects quite a bit more. Also, I can't really put my finger on it, but somehow I think that the Saturn version feels a little bit more enjoyable to me. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe that's all in my head. But what I really do love is the art style here. It's sort of like Metal Slug with a hand-drawn art style. Also, you can upgrade your ship in a couple different ways. I like how you can shoot depth charges out the bottom to blow up ships below you, or fire missiles out the top. Sometimes you have to surface in order to get the best effect out of your missiles, and other times you just have a gun on top, depending on which power-ups you pick up. This is a really cool game, even though it's really difficult, like way too difficult. But wait, Working Designs had one more great shooter for this system. Switching from the vertical to the horizontal, we have Thunder Force 5, a long time running, absolutely great series, and the weaponry here is simply amazing. Trying to figure out how to learn and use each one to its maximum effectiveness feels terrific. It lets you explore the game just a little bit more. Also, it's not too hard, especially if you adjust the difficulty way down. But what I really love is this laser weapon that you can sort of angle in front of you or behind you or at any possible angle anytime you want. The boss battles are creative and exciting. The music is terrific. This is pure Working Designs top-notch action at its absolute finest, and a must-have. But there's one more game that I want to talk about that I know you all heard of, but maybe you didn't try out for yourself. And that's Kain, another Japanese import, and kind of a hard to find one. You play as a pink-haired witch who also happens to have these little fairies that fly around her as her options. And because she's a witch, she can cast spells. You see those little marker cards at the bottom of the screen? Well, depending on if you have a red one or a blue one, depends on which spell she casts. Also, you could kind of choose which spells you collect by shooting the different gems, and they will change color. You could also upgrade your overall firing shot here. Now, what stands out in this game? Well, it's not the graphics. They feel like they could have been done on the Super Nintendo and were definitely done on the TurboGrafx 16. It's not the difficulty factor. It's actually a quite easy game. No, just the fact that it's fun and relaxing to play. When I want to play a shooter that I'm not going to die non-stop at, I turn to this one because I feel like I'm overpowered and in charge at all times. The bullets, I can see them coming a mile away and easily dodge out of the way. When I get hit, I feel like it's my mistake rather than my character moving too darn slow, and I really do like that whole magic system. When you look back at the PlayStation 1's lineup, lots of these games stand out, and you can't go wrong with any of them, especially not those Working Design games. However, one thing is clear, that if you loved video games in the mid-90s and shooters were your favorite style, well, you probably fell in love with your PlayStation 1. But of course, that's just my opinion. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it, and no, this wasn't even close to all of the shooters for this system. Matter of fact, I didn't even talk about my favorite shooter for the system, or even my top 2 shooters for the system. So if you want to stick around, I'm going to talk about them in the future, and until later, I will see you again, guys.